Have you ever looked into your child's eyes while you were crushing their hand with a hammer? I have. The first finger was the right index finger. I placed his hand on my dining room table, that wooden table where he'd blown out his birthday candles for 38 years, and I raised the hammer. Hector was tied to the chair. His eyes glazed over from the sedative, but completely conscious. He stared at me, not understanding. His mouth tried to form words, but only whimpers came out, and I brought the hammer down with all my strength. The sound was like a dry branch snapping. The finger bent at an impossible angle. The skin burst open. The bone peeked out white between the flesh. My son screamed. A muffled, guttural scream that didn't sound human. But I didn't stop. Second finger, third finger, fourth, fifth. Each blow was a name I repeated in my head. Each broken bone was a debt he was paying. When I finished with his right hand, I moved to his left. 10 shattered fingers, 10 phalanges turned to splinters. His hands, those hands he used every day at his job, were unrecognizable, masses of flesh, bone, and blood that hung from his wrists like torn gloves. But I wasn't done yet. I went to the kitchen and brought back the pliers. The same pliers he used in his dental office, the same ones he used to pull milk teeth from frightened children while promising them it wouldn't hurt. I forced his mouth open. He tried to resist, but he was too weak. I grabbed his front right tooth with the pliers and pulled. The tooth resisted. I had to pry, twist, yank. When it finally came free, it came with the root and all, leaving a bleeding gap in his gum. His perfect smile, that dentist's smile he displayed in his office photos, began to disappear tooth by tooth. 6 in total. The 6 front ones, the ones that showed when he smiled. I put them in a glass jar and left it on the table in front of him so he could see them, so he would understand. And then I took out the knife. I won't describe the stabs, not yet. I'll just say there were many, and that when I finished, my son was no longer breathing, and I was covered in his blood from head to toe. I sat on my living room floor next to his body and waited. I didn't call the police immediately. First, I prayed. I asked God for forgiveness for what I had done, and I asked for forgiveness from the people I couldn't protect in time. My name is Dolores Jackson. I'm 61 years old, and I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I was a homemaker my entire life. I raised 2 children alone after being widowed. I went to church every Sunday. I prayed the rosary every night. I'd never even killed a fly. And 3 years ago, I tortured and murdered my own son. I was given 39 years in prison. At my age, that means I'll die here. And I accept that because what I did is unforgivable under the law of man, but under God's law, my dear friend, under that law that protects the innocent and punishes those who harm them, under that law, I only fulfilled my mother's duty. I know right now you're thinking, this woman is crazy. What kind of mother does that to her child? What kind of monster tortures someone of their own blood? And you're right to think that, because what I did was monstrous, but what my son was doing was worse, much worse. And when I tell you, you'll understand. Or at least you'll have doubts. You'll ask yourselves, what would you have done in my place? And that question, dear listener, has no easy answer. I thank the owners of this channel for letting me record this confession. I know the insults, the dislikes, the accusations will come, but I need to tell this story before I die. I need the world to know what my son truly was. Not the beloved dentist, not the respected professional, not the exemplary son everyone thought they knew, but what was beneath that mask. What I discovered too late, what forced me to do the unthinkable. I ask you to listen until the end, not to judge me before you know the whole truth, because there are truths that change everything, that turn your world upside down, that force you to reconsider what you thought you knew about good and evil. This is one of those truths. And now it's yours too. I was born in a working-class neighborhood in Atlanta, where women were born to marry and have children. There were no other options, no dreams allowed. My mom taught me to cook, to clean, to be a good wife, and I learned well. I married David Williams at 19. He was a truck driver, hauling cargo between Atlanta and the coast. He didn't make much, but he was honest, hard-working, a good man. We had 2 children. First, Hector was born, then Marissa, and I dedicated myself to them body and soul. I raised them with values, with faith, with discipline. Hector was the family's pride. Intelligent, diligent, always getting the best grades. From a young age, he said he wanted to be a doctor, that he wanted to help people, and I worked cleaning other people's houses to pay for his college. I'd wake up at 5 a.m., come home at 10 p.m., my hands ruined from scrubbing floors. But it was worth it. For my children, everything was worth it. David died of a heart attack when Hector was 17 and Marissa 15. It was sudden. One day he was fine, the next he was in a coffin. I was left alone with 2 teenagers and an uncertain future, but I didn't give up. I worked double, triple, whatever it took for my children to succeed. Hector studied dentistry, specializing in pediatric dentistry. Children. He worked with children. And I was so proud. My son, the doctor, my son, the one who takes away children's fear at the dentist. My son. The one who has that gift for calming them, for making them laugh so they don't cry when he checks their teeth. Mothers adored him. They said he was the only dentist their children went to without throwing a tantrum, that he had magic with little ones. Magic. That word makes me sick now. Marissa married young to Greg Miller, a good young man who worked at a telecommunications company. They had a beautiful girl, Lucy, my granddaughter, the light of my eyes. When she was born, I felt that life was giving me another chance to love, to care, to protect. Lucy was a happy, cheerful child. She liked to dance, sing, play with dolls. She adored her Uncle Hector. Every time he came to visit us, she would run to hug him. "Uncle, Uncle!" She would shout with that high-pitched voice that melted my heart, and he would pick her up, spin her around, bring her gifts, promise to take her to the park, the favorite uncle, the perfect uncle, the uncle who hid something I couldn't imagine. Lucy was 7 when everything changed. One night, after a family gathering where Hector had been, the child woke up screaming. Marissa called me, scared. She said Lucy was trembling, that she didn't want anyone to touch her, that she was repeating nonsensical things. I rushed to her house. I found my granddaughter huddled in a corner of her room, hugging her pillow, her eyes wide open. I approached slowly, spoke softly to her. I asked her what was wrong, and what she told me that night broke me in 2. But that comes later. Dear listener, because first I need you to understand something. I need you to understand that I loved my son. I loved him from the moment I held him in my arms, newborn, with that wrinkled little face that looked at me without seeing. I loved him when he took his first steps, when he said his first word, when he graduated from high school, from college, from his specialization. I loved him, and that night in my granddaughter's room, that love began to die slowly, painfully, until there was nothing left. Lucy didn't want to talk at first. She covered her ears when I asked her what was wrong. She cried. She said she couldn't tell, that he would get angry, that he would hurt her mommy. I promised her no one would hurt her, that Grandma would protect her, that she could tell me anything, anything, and I would believe her. And then she started talking in her 7-year-old voice, with words no child her age should know. She told me what Uncle Hector did to her when they were alone. She told me about his fingers, about his mouth, about the things he said while he touched her. She told me that he warned her no one would believe her if she spoke, that everyone would think she was lying, that he was a doctor and she was just a silly little girl. She told me she was afraid to go to family gatherings, that she was afraid to be alone with him, that sometimes she faked a stomachache to avoid going. Every word was a dagger in my chest. Every detail was a confirmation of something my mind refused to accept because my granddaughter knew things, described things a 7-year-old child cannot invent, things she could only know if she had lived them. When she finished speaking, I hugged her. I hugged her so tight I thought I would break her. I told her I believed her, that it wasn't her fault, that she hadn't done anything wrong, that he was the bad one. Only him. I stayed with her that night until she fell asleep, and when her breathing became calm, I went out to the patio and vomited. I vomited until there was nothing left in my stomach, and then I cried. I cried with a pain I didn't know existed. a pain that burns you from within, that consumes you, that turns you into someone you didn't know. The following days were hell. I couldn't look at Hector. I couldn't be in the same room as him. But I couldn't say anything yet either because I needed to be sure. I needed to know if this was an isolated case or if there were more. I needed proof. I started investigating, asking around. I went to the church where I knew several mothers whose children were Hector's patients. I asked them very carefully how things had gone. If the children had had any problems, if they had noticed anything strange. And that's when the stories started coming out. Felicia Carter told me that her 6-year-old daughter, Vanessa, had changed a lot after going to Hector's office, that she had nightmares, that she didn't want anyone to touch her, that one day she said, "The doctor touched me wrong." But Felicia didn't believe her because Hector was so professional, so kind, so respected. She thought the child was confused, that she had misinterpreted something. Another mother told me that her 5-year-old daughter cried every time she was told she had a dentist's appointment, that she screamed she didn't want to go, that she hid under the bed, but they thought it was normal children's fear of doctors. Another told me that her 7-year-old son had started wetting the bed after a visit, that he had night terrors, that a psychologist had told them they seemed like symptoms of trauma, but they never identified the cause. Each story was another nail in my son's coffin. Each testimony was a confirmation of the nightmare I was living. My son was a predator. My son, the beloved doctor, the respected professional, the favorite uncle, was a monster who abused children. Children sedated in his office who couldn't resist or clearly remember, his own niece who adored him and trusted him, God knows how many more. When I had enough information, I decided to confront him. I needed to hear it from his mouth. I needed to see his face when I accused him. I needed to know if there was any humanity left in that man who had come from my womb. I called him to my house, told him I needed to talk to him. Something important. He came without suspecting anything. He sat in my living room with that usual smile, that smile that now disgusted me, and I asked him directly, "What did you do to Lucy?" His expression changed for just a second. A flicker of surprise, of fear, of something dark, but he recovered quickly. He told me he didn't know what I was talking about, that Lucy was his beloved niece, that he would never hurt her. I told him what the child had told me, the details, the descriptions, the words no 7-year-old should know. And as I spoke, I watched him unravel, as his smile turned into a grimace, as his eyes lost that false sparkle and showed what was really underneath. When I finished, he was silent for a moment and then said something that chilled my blood. He said, "Girls exaggerate, Mom. They're very dramatic at that age. I never hurt them, really. I just touched them. It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal." Those were his words. It's not a big deal. I asked him how many. How many girls? How many victims? And he shrugged. He said he didn't keep count. That there were many. That he'd been doing it for years. That it was easy in his office because the children were sedated and afterward didn't remember well. That with Lucy it had been more complicated, but that it was worth it because she was so pretty, so sweet, so trusting. I vomited right there, in my own living room, in front of my own son, and while I wiped my mouth, he continued speaking calmly, coldly, as if discussing the weather. He told me that if I reported him, he would deny everything. That the girls were too young to testify. That their memories under sedation were confused, that he had lawyers, contacts, a reputation, that no prosecutor would believe a crazy old woman over a respected professional. And then he threatened me. He told me he had photos, videos, material of his victims stored in a safe place. He told me that if I spoke, he would distribute that material, that he would ruin those girls forever, that Lucy would appear on the internet for the whole world to see, and that afterwards he would continue doing what he did because no one, absolutely no one, could stop him. Dear friend, dear listener, if you have made it this far, I ask you a favor. Like this video, subscribe to the channel by pressing that black button that says subscribe. Because stories like this need to be told. We need to talk about the monsters that hide in our families, in our communities, in the places where we entrust our children, and this channel gives a voice to women like me who carry truths too heavy to carry alone. Now get ready, because what comes next will shake your soul. What I did after hearing those threats changed my life forever, and changed the lives of many families I didn't even know. I spent 3 sleepless days after that conversation, 3 days thinking, calculating, begging God to show me another path. I went to church and knelt before the Blessed Sacrament for hours. I asked for guidance. I asked for strength. I asked him to tell me what to do because my head told me to go to the police, to report my son, to let justice act. But my heart knew that justice wouldn't act in time. That Hector was right about one thing. The testimonies of such young girls weren't enough. That without physical evidence, without concrete proof, the case would fall apart. And meanwhile, he would remain free, continue working, continue having access to children. I thought about talking to Marissa, about telling her what her brother had done to her daughter. But how do you tell a mother something like that? How do you destroy the image of her brother, of her family, of everything she thought she knew? And worse, if I spoke, Hector would carry out his threat. Lucy's material would appear on the internet. My granddaughter would be marked forever. It was a perfect trap. He had calculated everything, and I was trapped. It was then that I made the decision. It wasn't an impulse. It wasn't madness. It was a cold, logical, inevitable conclusion. If the system couldn't protect those girls, I would. If the law couldn't punish my son, I would. And if I was going to destroy him, I would do it in a way that he understood, that he felt, that he remembered, in his last moments of life. I would make him pay with the very parts of his body that he had used to cause harm. His hands, which had touched dozens of defenseless girls. His mouth that had whispered threats and lies. And then I would kill him. I spent 2 weeks preparing. I went to his office when it was closed. I knew where he kept the emergency key because I had given it to him myself years ago. I went in and looked for 2 things, the sedatives he used on his patients and the dental extraction pliers. I found them easily. I also found the safe where he kept his secrets. I couldn't open it, but I memorized its location to tell the police later. The day I decided to do it was a Sunday. I told Hector I wanted us to have lunch together, that I had thought a lot and wanted to make peace, that he was my son and I loved him no matter what, that we needed to talk as a family. He came confidently, arrogantly, convinced that he had broken me. He sat at my table and smiled at me with that perfect smile that I had adored for 38 years. That smile that I now saw for what it truly was, a predator's mask. I cooked his favorite dish, a hearty southern meal with fried chicken, mac and cheese, collard greens, cornbread, and sweet potatoes, everything just the way he liked it. And in his glass of sweet tea, I put the sedative, the same one he used to sedate his victims. We ate quietly, talked about trivialities, and after 20 minutes, the sedative began to take effect. His eyes glazed over. His head began to droop. He tried to get up, but his legs didn't respond. He looked at me confused and asked, "Mom, what's happening?" I replied, "What should have happened a long time ago? My son." I dragged him to the dining chair. He was heavy, but the adrenaline gave me strength. I tied him with ropes I had bought days before, arms to the backrest, legs to the chair legs, tied tightly. He tried to struggle, but the sedative had him weak. He could only whimper and look at me with those eyes that I no longer recognized as my son's. I placed his right hand on the table, the hand with which he signed prescriptions, the hand with which he caressed his patients before touching them where he shouldn't. I took the hammer I had taken from David's, my late husband's, toolbox, and I told him, "This is for Lucy." The first blow shattered his index finger. His scream was so loud I thought the neighbors would hear it, but my house is far from the others, and even if they had heard, I no longer cared. I broke every finger on his right hand, one by one, calmly, telling him a name with each blow. Lucy, Vanessa, Carol, Maria, Sophia, names of girls he had touched, names I had gathered in my weeks of investigation, names he probably didn't even remember because to him they were just objects, things to use and discard. Then I moved to his left hand, another 5 fingers, another 5 names. Isabel, Danielle, Camille, Gabby, Julia. When I finished with his hands, they were destroyed. He no longer screamed. He only whimpered with a low, constant sound, like a wounded animal. Blood ran down his arms, dripped to the floor, stained the tablecloth I had embroidered when he was a child, but the smile was still missing. I took the pliers from his own office, the same ones he used every day. I showed them to him and saw the terror in his eyes. I told him, "With this mouth you told them it wouldn't hurt. With this mouth you promised them everything would be all right. With this mouth you threatened them so they wouldn't speak." I forced his mouth open. He tried to bite me, but his reflexes were too slow. I grabbed his upper right front tooth and pulled. The sound was horrible. A wet crunch followed by a tear. The tooth came out with the root and all, leaving a bleeding gap. Hector howled in pain. I pulled out 6 teeth, all 6 upper front ones, the ones that showed when he smiled. I put them in a glass jar and left it on the table in front of him. I told him, "You won't be smiling at any more children." And then I went to the kitchen for the knife. It was the big knife, the butcher's knife, the one I used to cut meat on Sundays. I took it with both hands because I knew I would need it. I returned to the living room and stood in front of my son. He looked at me with wide eyes. His shattered hands hung uselessly. His mouth was bleeding from the tooth gaps, and on his face there was something I had never seen before. Genuine fear. I told him, "I loved you my whole life, Hector. I worked myself to exhaustion to give you a future. I gave you everything I had. And you used it to harm innocent children, your own niece, dozens of girls who trusted you. I have no forgiveness for having raised you this way. I have no excuse for not seeing what you were, but I do have the power to stop you. And I am going to use it." The first stab was to his chest. The knife went in easier than I expected. Hector convulsed, tried to scream, but only blood came from his mouth. The second stab was lower, in his stomach, the third in his side. I lost count after that. I just know I didn't stop until he stopped moving, until his eyes were fixed, staring into nothing, until I knew he was dead. I stood in front of his body for a time I cannot calculate. Minutes, hours. I don't know. I was covered in blood. My arms ached from the effort. My heart was beating so hard I thought I was going to have a heart attack, but I didn't. And when I could finally move, I went to the phone and dialed 911. I told the operator, "Come to my house. I just killed my son, and I need you to bring investigators, because in his office, there's a safe with child abuse material." And I hung up. The police arrived in 15 minutes. They entered with drawn weapons, shouting for me to get on the floor. I was sitting in the kitchen with my hands on the table, waiting for them. I didn't resist. I didn't try to flee. I told them where the body was, where the weapons were, and where they needed to look for Hector's material. Sergeant Thomas Riley was the one who took my initial statement. A burly man about 45 years old with hard eyes that had seen too much violence. But when I told him about the girls, when I explained what my son was, those eyes softened for a moment, just a moment. Then he returned to his professionalism and read me my rights. They arrested me, handcuffed me, took me to the station, all following protocol. But while I was being processed, another team went to Hector's office. They found the safe, opened it, and what they found inside confirmed everything I had said. Hundreds of photos, dozens of videos, material of more than 40 girls, some as young as 4 years old, all documented, all archived, with dates, names, ages. My son had been meticulous. He had kept evidence of his crimes as if they were trophies, as if he were proud. When Sergeant Riley told me what they had found, I didn't feel satisfaction, only nausea and a sadness so deep I thought I would drown in it. The trial was long. My lawyer, Dr. Evelyn Reed, tried to argue defense of others. She said I had acted to protect innocent children, that there was no other option, that the system had failed for 15 years while my son destroyed lives. But the prosecutor was relentless. He said I had committed premeditated torture, that I had planned every detail coldly, that the way I killed my son showed sadism, cruelty, extreme brutality, that no matter how monstrous Hector was, I had no right to execute him. The jury deliberated for 4 days, 4 days in which I waited in a cell praying, crying, wondering if I had done the right thing. I was found guilty of aggravated homicide with torture and cruelty. The judge sentenced me to 39 years. He said he understood my motives, but that a civilized society cannot allow its citizens to take justice into their own hands. I did not appeal. I arrived at this prison 3 years ago. At first, the other inmates avoided me. They thought I was a crazy old woman who had tortured her son out of insanity. But when the full story came out, things changed. Some treated me with respect. One told me, "You did what many of us dreamed of doing." Another, "I wish someone had stopped the man who raped me as a child." But there was also hatred. Women who spat at me, who called me a murderer, who said nothing justified what I did, and maybe they were right. The letters started arriving weeks after the trial. Families of Hector's victims, mothers who had seen photos of their daughters in that safe, fathers who couldn't look at their girls without thinking about what had happened to them. Some letters were hateful. They said I had raised the monster, that it was my fault for not realizing that I deserved to rot in prison. Others were confusingly grateful. One mother wrote to me, "I don't know whether to thank you or curse you. You stopped him, but you also raised him. My daughter will have lifelong trauma from what he did to her, but at least she is alive, and he can't harm anyone else. I guess that's something. Something. That's what's left of all this. Something. Marissa doesn't speak to me. My daughter hasn't come to see me once in 3 years. She can't forgive me for killing her brother. She can't accept what he was. She lives in denial. She prefers to believe that I went crazy, that the accusations were false, that her brother was innocent. I don't blame her. It's easier to believe your mother is crazy than to accept that your brother was a child predator. But Greg, my son-in-law, has visited me. In secret. Without telling Marissa, he told me that Lucy is in therapy, that she has improved a lot, that she no longer has nightmares every night, that she is starting to heal, and every time he comes, he brings me a drawing that the child made for me. Lucy draws me flowers, houses with red roofs, smiling suns, and in each drawing there are 2 figures, a little girl and an old woman holding hands, and below, in a child's shaky handwriting, it says, "To my grandma Dolores, I love you very much. Those drawings are my only treasure in this cell, my only proof that I did something right. 6 months ago, I learned something that changed everything I thought I knew about my son. A detective who worked on the case came to see me. He told me they had continued investigating the material found in the safe. They had identified the victims. They had tracked the dates and discovered that Hector had started much earlier than I thought, 15 years. My son had been abusing children for 15 years. He started in his medical residency. His first victims were patients at the public hospital where he did his internship. Children from poor families who wouldn't file complaints, who didn't have resources for lawyers, who didn't know who to turn to. Then he opened his private practice and continued. He perfected his method. He learned that sedatives left less memory. He learned to gain the trust of parents. He learned to select victims who wouldn't speak or who wouldn't be believed. More than 40 documented victims, and probably many more that will never be known. When the detective told me this, I didn't cry. I had no tears left. I only felt an immense emptiness, a black hole where my heart used to be. I asked him why he was telling me this. What was the point now? He told me. Because you have a right to know that you didn't kill a man who had made some mistakes. You killed a serial predator who was never going to stop, who would have continued doing it until he died of old age, and who probably would have left hundreds of victims in his wake. I asked him if that made me less guilty. He said, "That's for you to decide, Ms. Jackson." And he left. That night I thought a lot about what he told me, about the numbers. 40 victims in 15 years, almost 3 per year. And Hector was only 38 years old when I killed him. He had, with luck, 40 more years of life. 40 years multiplied by 3 victims per year. 120 more children who could have suffered if I hadn't stopped him. 120 plus those he had already harmed, plus those we will never know. Does that justify what I did? I don't know. Do I regret it? That's the question everyone wants to know. The question journalists, psychologists, other inmates ask me, "Do you regret it, Dolores? Would you do it again?" The answer is complicated. I regret raising a monster. I regret not seeing the signs. I regret every moment I trusted him, defended him, bragged about him to my friends. I regret being so blind for so many years. I regret torturing him, the broken fingers, the pulled teeth. Every second of pain I caused him. Not because he didn't deserve it, but because in doing so, I became something I never wanted to be. I crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. I stained my hands with a violence that will haunt me to my grave. But do I regret stopping him, preventing him from continuing to harm children, protecting Lucy and all the girls who would have been his victims? No, I don't regret that. And if God asks me when I reach the gates of heaven, I will tell him exactly that. I will tell him that I killed my son to protect his children, that I condemned myself to save the innocent, that I will carry that sin for all eternity because someone had to do it, and that I would do it 1,000 times again, even if it costs me my soul. Dear friend, dear listener, if you have made it this far, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I know this story is terrible. I know it stirs up things we'd rather not think about: family, about trust, about the monsters we sometimes raise unknowingly. If this story moved something inside you, like it, subscribe to the channel. It's that black button that says subscribe. You just have to press it once. Help more women like me tell their truths. Ugly truths, uncomfortable truths, truths the world needs to hear. And if you have a similar story, if you lived through something that forced you to make impossible decisions, leave it in the comments. Not for judgment, but so you know you're not alone, that there are other women carrying similar burdens, that sometimes life puts us at crossroads where all options are bad and we can only choose the least bad. I apologize if the video was too long, but some stories don't fit in 5 minutes. Stories that need space to breathe, to be told completely. I also apologize if there are things I didn't explain well. There are details I omit to protect the victims. Lucy, the other girls whose names appeared in that material. They deserve privacy. They deserve to heal without everyone knowing who they are. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for not closing the video when I said I broke my son's fingers with a hammer. Thank you for staying until the end, and thank you for understanding. Even a little. Why I did it? I don't ask for forgiveness. I don't ask for absolution. I just ask you to remember one thing. Sometimes a mother's love means protecting all children, even if that means destroying your own. Take good care of yourselves. Take care of your loved ones. And if you ever suspect that something bad is happening to a child, don't be silent. Don't do what the doubting mothers did. Don't do what I did for years. Act, speak up, report it. Because monsters exist, and sometimes they have the face of your own child. Until always, may God bless you and protect all the children in the world, from all monsters, even those who sleep under the same roof, even those who share your blood. Amen.